Perversion knows no party. I'm going to repeat that for you. Perversion knows no party. So that was the title of an email or an e-blast that I sent out on one of my newsletters. And as well as this morning, I sent out an e-blast just as a because it was something, you know, that was on my mind. And so usually I try to share these things with everybody. So Perversion Knows No Party was one of my e-newsletters as well as a blog post, and it was something that I got a lot of feedback from, that people saying, hey, would you please do a little video about it, because I think it's important, and that people understand that perversion knows no party. And it's like, why do I say that? Well, I say that because there's so many social media posts out there that talk about how the lgbTQ TransQueer code, as well as the Democrat Party, how they're all targeting children, and then these statements are met with opposing statements or posts, right, that say that, well, Republicans and priests and the ones in the church, they're guilty of targeting children as well, and this is correct. The deviant desires to sexualize or traffic children, they are not respecters of persons, and they do not just infect people on one side of the aisle. See, I post things often that show how the lgbTQ TransQueer Rainbow Code movement target and victimize children, and how I can see clearly that I am biased when it comes to pointing out those specific things, right? Because guess what? It is okay to be biased. Bias means to incline to one side, and I definitely incline to one side. But look, I also try very hard to remain in the middle, because I don't want to fall on either side, right? Why? Because I am not a Democrat. I am not a Republican. And I am conservative on some issues, and I'm liberal on other issues. And do you know who was like that as well? Jesus the Christ. He was conservative on some issues and liberal on other issues. And because I'm a follower of the Christ, and I only desire to be like him, that's, you know, I can pretty much point out the things that I point out and see it from a different perspective as those who lean far to the left or lean to the right, right? And with a criminal history or a criminal past like mine, that's not an easy task. Why? Because the world doesn't believe in redemption at all. And the church only believes in redemption. Wait, how did I put that yesterday? The world doesn't believe in redemption at all, but the church only doesn't believe in redemption for all, right? So many people can criticize my past, and that's okay, because my past is my proof of what the lgbTQ movement, the TransQueer cult, does and is doing. There's homosexuals on both sides of the aisle, and some are being embraced by church buildings, and some are being embraced by the right. Less and less are being embraced by the left, because they're standing up against the TransQueer cult, and it's kind of a mess within that realm, right? But I want to read to you a post. Perversion knows Okay. So let me pull that up on the screen. I wanted to read to you the actual poster and well the e-blast that I had sent out. All right. So because I kind of touched on the some of it in the beginning. So because the right and the left and the churches are all embracing um, homosexuality and transgenderism and different things, right? That doesn't change the fact. It doesn't change the fact that homosexuality and transgenderism are not only sin, but those things are pornographic by their very nature when they're presented to young developing minds, right? Those things destroy vulnerable, impressionable minds while confusing the developing sexuality of those impressionable and vulnerable minds. And the same goes for like lesbianism and bestiality, pedophilia, bisexuality, etc., right? So the message to everyone with children is to please stop allowing your children to be in the presence of these damned perversions. Stop sacrificing your children to this diabolical hypersexualized agenda. So the reason so many people wanted me to talk about this blog post in a video is because of this story that comes with it. So I had a chat with a man that was a convicted. He was convicted of a child sex crime. And the man was a lifelong conservative Republican. He was a lifelong Christian. He was a deacon at his church, a pillar of the community. He was a husband and a father. This man dedicated his life to teaching children, to safeguarding children, and to the care of children. This man then became a principal, and his life was about to change forever. I want to understand what me myself, I reach out to people that go to prison or get arrested on for sexually heinous crimes, especially those that are involve adults and children. And I reach out to them because one, I feel led to. I do. I feel led to. But two, I reach out to them because I want to know what happened to them. I want to understand what brings them to the threshold of actually offending. And so even with this man, I wanted to understand what brought him, a principal, former teacher, Christian, deacon, pillar of the community, husband, father, right, to the point where perversion enveloped him. My heart broke for him. And I know it sounds crazy and it might even sound sick to some of you, but having been the victim and the victimizer, I see things on a more spiritual basis than most people do. And I know how perversion and how lusts of the flesh can oppress or possess anyone, regardless of their beliefs or how many times they attend church services. So none of us have arrived. And I want all of us to understand that none of us have arrived and none of us are safe from the enemy of our soul, and none of us are safe from perversion, from oppression, from demonization. And I'm going to call the man Kyle for the sake of this article. Kyle told me he had never had any type of sexual thoughts or feelings for any child ever in his life. He was happily married. He had 2 children of his own. He was a pillar of this community. He was the deacon of his church. As a lifelong teacher and then a principal of a school, he dedicated his life to protecting children. He even told me how he had told a few of his friends from college, some of his college friends, and they stay in contact, they hang out once a week, they get together or whatever. But he said he remembers telling a few of his college friends how sick and demented they were for thinking that the Catholic schoolgirl uniform was erotic or sexy. He said it was just sick. He said it was like sexualizing young people, youth, children. Well, Kyle found himself on the fence with all of the curriculum and material changes that lean towards the lgbTQ movement, especially the books that he was seeing come across his desk. He had many meetings with staff, especially the counselors, about the books, the materials, and the curriculum that was being introduced. He just wanted to understand the repercussions if he decided to refuse or deny any of the books or curriculum changes. Well, after a summer of meetings and research, he was convinced by false information and false statistics that he had to allow the changes and additions in the curriculum because he didn't want to be the cause of any child taking their own life. He had no clue that the whole suicidal ideation scam was put in place to do exactly what it did to him, right? And exactly what it does to people all over the world. Give those making decisions shame and or guilt over not agreeing with this sexualized curriculum and agenda. Kyle had no clue that the entire suicidal ideation was merely emotional blackmail. He allowed the books and he allowed the curriculum to come into his school. His decision was also influenced by the insistence of the superintendent. Kyle said that he had began to feel different when he was researching the books and the materials. These explicit pornographic books that we've seen in the last so many years about all of this nonsense that's going on with them and how they're trying to get them ripped out of the schools. Well, that is exactly what Kyle studied and read and researched. And that's when he knew that something was different. He told me that it felt almost like he was becoming obsessed with the books, with the materials. And while he told himself that it was just to quote unquote know the material better, he also began to recognize how the material was taking some kind of control over him and giving him some very perverted thoughts. The oppression, right? The demonization began. So it wasn't long before the lgbTQ trans activist staff and allies had created a clothing closet in the school for students who identified as trans or queer to change into clothing that they thought or felt matched their gender identity. Kyle decided one day he was going to go to this closet and just to see what was in it. And when he walked in on a boy that was changing into bra and panties, and the boy wasn't embarrassed at all. He said he didn't even try to hide himself. The principal just walked in, right? A grown man. But he didn't try to hide himself. And instead, Kyle said this teenage boy began to pose for him and like he was showing off for the principal. And this rattled Kyle, and he left immediately. And that boy, if I think about this situation as it was explained to me, that boy had obviously been sexualized or victimized, right? which was obvious by his reaction. Kind of what the point of these materials is to desensitize them and to sexualize them. Maybe to open them up for predators. There was over 350 educators arrested in 2023 just for child sex crimes, right? And if we look at their statistics, their statistics tell us that over 60% of these child sex crimes go unreported. Tells you that there's a whole lot more educators and staff in these government schools that either haven't been caught or haven't been reported. Kyle felt like he had crossed a very serious line by allowing the clothing closet to be installed, especially by what had just happened. That teen boy who identified as a girl started showing up to Kyle's office and asking him to talk about stuff that he was going through. Whatever he was going through at home and some other things that he was experiencing, Kyle ended up molesting this boy. Kyle ended up engaging in acts with this boy. As I chatted with Kyle, he said something that really set me off. He said, it was consensual. I never forced him to do anything. Meaning, now don't get upset. Meaning that he never had to physically force or threaten the boy to engage. In this case, it was actually initiated by the boy. I want everyone to understand something. Sex with a child can never be consensual. Ever. Sex with a child can never, ever be consensual.
Listen, I wasn't held down and forced to do anything. I actually associated my molestation with love, which is why at 8 years old, I was cutting school and I was going and hanging out in a public bathroom on the boardwalk in Atlantic City, waiting for any pervert to come along. I would sit at bus stops and I would just sit there and wait. And he would always show up. Young or old, it didn't matter. But I was never held down and forced to do anything. And although there were times where I really believe that I tried to manipulate or instigate the situation as a child, it's still molestation. There's some things that are never meant, ever. Never ever meant for a child to endure. And I gotta tell you, sex is one of them. When an adult engages with a child, it's a violation.
Children can never, ever consent. Ever. There is no such thing as consensual sex between an adult and a child, ever. So this boy was definitely conditioned, right? He was victimized by someone else so severely that he saw nothing wrong with engaging in those activities with an adult, even with his principal. And so I think back to when I was molested and when I was sex trafficked and how I longed for that male validation, the affirmation, and the attention that my molesters gave to me. So I know this darkness very well. I know it intimately. And as I went out looking for adults to engage sexually with as a child, I know. I know how it happens and that it happens. But it never changes the fact that children cannot consent ever. Kyle knew that what he was doing was wrong. He felt that he was a perverted monster. Kyle eventually began the spiral into the depths of lewd and lascivious pornography, which even led to his arrest when he was caught chatting with an FBI agent that he thought was a teen boy online. But what makes Kyle stand out to me and gives me reason to believe him is that he was only going to be charged with possession of child pornography. It was the shame that he had about what he did physically with that boy that made him confess to engaging in sexual conduct with the boy. Kyle never would have been caught for his actual sex crime against that boy, but for his own conscience and his moral compass that seemed to come and go according to him. The perversions of sexual lust and desires have no boundaries. There's no boundaries. And these things can oppress anyone, even you. Man or woman, Democrat or Republican, liberal or conservative, black or white or brown or beige or yellow, follower of the Christ or non-believer, old or young. But when we learn of Kyle's story and many others that I've communicated with, right? It almost always stems from something else. Almost every man or woman sex offender that I have met, that I've spoken to, or I've had written communication with has been abused. Sexually, emotionally, mentally, or physically. But there are a rising amount of sex offenders in years recent that have not been abused as children, at least not in the way we think of abuse. Some were perverted by pornography or explicit materials that they were introduced to. The immorality of the material itself is what leads many into the darkness of child sexualization and victimization. That is exactly what these materials are created for. That's their purpose, to sexualize everyone that comes into contact with them. If these books and materials could sexualize or pervert a grown man with a moral compass, then exactly what are they doing when they're being presented to these children? Having had such a huge increase in child sex crimes within the government schools should alert everyone to the depravity of such materials and agendas when it comes to anything sexual or questionable within those indoctrination centers. So it's our duty, it's our charge. We must warn them so that they are without excuse. I'm going to say that again. We must warn them so that they are without excuse. There is no shortage of information out there. We are at the end game. You know, I say all the time, ignorance is not bliss, ignorance is bondage. Ignorance is now an active choice. Those who are ignorant now to what is happening are ignorant by choice. When I was in elementary school, one of the trusted adults, aka teachers, kept me for detention. He gave me a National Geographic magazine to look at while I sat in silence. The magazine was full of naked males and females from some tribe in Africa. Being a young boy, I was curious, so I kept looking. That teacher later molested me several times. The counselor and gym teacher also had a go at me for a while. 2 teachers before I even hit the 4th grade. There were others, a family friend, family member, the father of one of my friends. So yeah, I know this perversion well, and I know that it has no preference on who it chooses to saturate with deviant thoughts and or behaviors. Listen, folks, there's nothing but perversion going on out there right now. Everywhere you turn. This was, listen, this is just recently. This is in Alabama, I believe. Yeah, Bibb County, Alabama. In an underground bunker, they brought children and animals for other people to come and pay to engage in sexual activity with them. Most of them are parents, and they brought their own children. There's many more people being looked at for this, and they say it began in 2022. It's just what's going on is horrendous, right? A family of a 10-year-old girl allegedly tortured to death says Child Protective Services ignored dozens of warnings. 10-year-old girl allegedly murdered. She was tortured. I can't even listen to it. How about this 11-year-old targeted in a murder plot by his friends in 5th grade? Yeah, they actually had one who was going to bring the knife, one who was going to do the stabbing, one who was going to be a lookout, one who was going to hold him down. All of they had this planned. Children. The perversion is very, very real. Very real. And it doesn't care what you believe or what you think or what you feel or who you are or what you've done or where you live at or what language you speak or what your politics is. It's coming for you. It's coming to saturate your soul. Lord have mercy. I'm going to try to just jump over to a post that I sent out this morning. So everyone has suffered some type of trauma in their life, some worse than others. And my goal is to open eyes. My goal is to allow other people to understand as best that I can. Because if you have never endured the struggles or the traumas or experiences of others, then you can't possibly, there's just no way that you can ever understand their struggles or their reasons for reacting the way that they do in certain situations. Here, I can share it with you all. So for those who are triggered by certain situations, let me say that I get it. I do. Surprisingly, I was watching a video clip of ICE agents jumping out of a van and tear gassing or macing a small group and then dragging a few of them off to jail. And while I was rooting for them finally being able to react to these terrorists, I was also shocked. I was shocked because something was triggered in me, and I went back to a time of my life that was very dark. I went back to prison in my mind. And now I had seen these videos many times, but this one video, just the way that that one of those agents grabbed this leg of this man and was just dragging him across the concrete into the facility, it really struck a chord in me. And so this is an actual journal entry. This is the memory that it took me back to, that I made the first year I was rescued from the cesspools of the lgbTQ cult. The entries were a lot of dark details of different situations I had been through because I wanted to write my testimonial book. Now, most of these entries never made it into my book, as I was recommended to leave them out because the details were too much for some people, I was told. And this journal entry is a memory of just one of the horrific experiences that I had when I was in prison. So journal entry from September 15th, 2010. It was 6:09 a.m. when I wrote this. I didn't mind getting in trouble and being sent to the hole, solitary confinement, because in lockdown, I could stay in bed all day and my meals, my soy-laden slop, were brought to me. This is the life, I thought to myself on more than one occasion, in the filthy 6x9 cement room while laying on my 1-inch thick, worn out piece of foam they called a mattress as it rested on that cold steel frame. And that was the county jail. Then I finally graduated to prison. And it was a whole new ballgame. Now I was being housed with real convicts that had a lot more time to do than the guys I was used to in the county jails. These convicts were also guilty of some horrible and heinous crimes. Lifers were the men that had life sentences, and some had multiple life sentences. So my first week in prison, I had been coerced to engage in many sexual activities with more than I can ever count. Not to mention the ones that I was engaging with just for kicks. It wasn't so much that I minded being coerced, which really is just a better word for forced or raped. It was almost nothing at that point in my life. The streets had taught me how to lay there, take it, and then zone out so I could move on and forget all about it when the perp was done with me. I was just a commodity after all. It is sad to be immune to rape and to believe it is okay or normal to be forced to be the subject of some random man's lusts and pleasures, especially afterwards to not report it, but to just take a shower, wash it away, and move on. At times, I believe I found solace in the attention that I got or the deranged thought that I was just that irresistible. Just me trying to reason away the trauma. And that happens a lot. I always wanted more. I just didn't know that more was available to actually to the likes of me, right? I really just wanted to be loved or at least held and comforted. But if they couldn't handle that, then it was time they went to the commissary and took care of me from that point forward. I became a hooker on the inside of those prison walls because I was a hooker on the outside of those prison walls. It really is all I knew, engaging in sexual activities with men and boys for kicks, for free, for pay, for trade, for survival. And it was what I thought getting attention or surviving was really all about. There was one incident that haunted me for many years. And up until recently, actually, I hadn't thought about it for a while. And like I said, that one little video of those ICE agents dragging people and spraying them with that tear gas, it triggered this memory in me. So there was one incident that haunted me for many years. I was transferred to another prison, and long story short, I ended up punching a correctional officer in the face for calling me queer. Now, that word was a very derogatory and insulting slur back then. I know now everyone's running around talking about they're queer, but they had no idea what it was back then. So after hitting the officer, I immediately knew I screwed up. I was emotionally driven by thoughts and feelings with the abnormal condition of mental confusion, because that's what gender dysphoria is. Not to mention, I had been on wrong sex hormones for years. Wrong sex hormones are psychotropic drugs that alter brain development, brain function, and brain structure. These poisons cause major chemical imbalances in your brain. I was attacked, I was maced, I was beaten, I was stomped, and I was hurt bad by the response team. That's a group of tactical response officers for fights or riots. After being dragged across the entire compound, literally dragged by my feet across the concrete to the confinement block, I was it's something. After they got me to confinement, they put me in a shower stall, naked. Now the shower stall had bars on it, every couple of hours I was gassed or maced. They would just kind of walk by the shower, take their canister out, and just spray me. And it's military grade tear gas. And then eventually I was placed in a cell with 2 lifers, 2 convicts that were serving life sentences. Both of these men were in solitary confinement lockdown for at least a year prior, and both of them were awaiting transfer to a maximum security compound. I was literally and horrifically used and abused for days. I was rescued by chance, actually. The only friend I had made there was a nurse from the main compound. So when you first come on to this prison, you go to the main compound that they call the annex. And then you go to one of 2 other compounds to be housed. So this nurse from the main compound had just so happened to fill in for the usual nurse that day and had to bring medications to an inmate that was in the lockdown area that they had me in. Well, she saw me laying on that floor. She saw me beat down. I was bruised. I was completely out of it, dazed. I was drained. She demanded I be brought up to the main compound ASAP. That nurse probably saved my life. It was nothing nice, and I was reminded of those horrible 3 days and nights for a very long time, with the stitches, the aches, the pains, internal and external, as well as the terrible nightmares I suffered for years to come. I never thought that watching a video clip of federal agents gassing some terrorists and dragging them off to jail would trigger emotions in me like it did. But it did. So I was transferred out of that prison after I was rescued by the nurse. And I was informed that I could either file a formal report or complaint, and then I would have ended up staying there in that prison. Or I could forget it ever happened, be sent to another facility of my choice, and get all of my gain time, which is something that the prison system gives you or takes away for your good behavior or bad behavior if they take it away. And then I could get out of prison sooner rather than later. And the administration blackmailed me into not reporting how the officers on that compound treated me or the danger that they placed me in when they put me in a cell with 2 convicted murderers serving life sentences. And one of the things to remember is that I was a trans-identified person. I had breasts. I looked like a woman, to them especially. So, of course, I opted to forget all about it and go to a different prison. I did my time, but what really surprised me the most was that I actually felt bad when it was time for me to go home. I wasn't quite sure I wanted to leave prison. I was what they call safe in the cage. Now, that's the end of my journal entry. And of course, this part wasn't in my journal entry. That's why I added the asterisks and made it italic and underlined. So what is safe in the cage? And that really was the meaning to want to bring this to everybody. Safe in the cage is a term that's used when someone is in prison and then they get so used to the safety or the confines of having their meals, accommodations, etc., all taken care of, that they don't really have a desire to be free. Just like a bird in a cage is safe, but unable to soar. A person who remains in their cage feels safe, but doesn't realize they'll never get the fulfillment that comes from being in the free world. So I've known some inmates to commit another crime before their release date just to stay in prison. There was one that I knew very well that I used to kind of hang out with, and he made a shank, which is a homemade knife. They would take springs out of the older beds that were still on the compound. They would take toothpicks. They would break open razors that you shave with, and melt them into toothbrushes, all kinds of things. They would just make a homemade knife. And this guy went out onto the rec yard just to stab somebody, anybody. He didn't care who it was going to be, just so he could catch another charge, because he wanted to remain in prison because he didn't want to leave his lover, his boyfriend. Thinking back, right, it's like God, I know God kept me so safe in his grip, even when I was denying him and ignoring him, right? But God. In prison, I received so much attention. I was the closest thing to a woman some of them men would ever see again. And that was my mentality. That was the way I thought. I am so very blessed to be able to look back and see the man that I am today, and see what a powerful and faithful God we have. But what about the church members that are safe in the pew? Those who fear the world and fear going out into it to do actual ministry? What about those who would rather sit and wait for some rapture to take place, right? To get them out of here before it gets any worse. Buckle your seatbelts, buttercups, because it's about to get a whole lot worse. My question to the church: are you prepared to be the word, the deed, and the action that introduces others to the Christ, even during chaotic and troubling times? You got to come out of those four walls and stop playing church and actually be the church. Amen and amen. Hey guys, I appreciate y'all so much, and I'm just grateful that I have this platform that I can share things. If anything that I ever talk about or say or post strikes a chord with you and you want to talk about it, just shoot me a message. I'm down. I am down to talk about it. I'm down to answer questions, have a good old Q&A session. I'm down with that too. Because we're living in some urgent times. So don't be safe in the pew like I became safe in the cage. I was going to see if there's anything I wanted to share. But I think I'm gonna end it at that note. I appreciate you, and y'all remain blessed. Peace.